Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I know that, in our new or not so new remote world, that Zoom fatigue is real and it's a really beautiful day outside. So we really appreciate you sharing your Zoom boxes with us, even though, you could be outside right now. My name is Zoe Siegel, and I am the Director of Climate Resilience at Greenbelt Alliance. For those of you who are not familiar with us, Greenbelt Alliance is an environmental nonprofit that works across the Bay Area to educate, advocate, and collaborate to ensure that the Bay Area's lands and communities are resilient to a changing climate. I'm joining you all here today from Chochenyo land, and throughout this workshop, we will be discussing land that was originally inhabited by the Chochenyo, Karkan, and Bay Miwok tribes. Today, we commonly refer to this area as Contra Costa County. If you haven't done so already, please take a moment to introduce yourself and where you're from in the chat. You've all joined us today because you're either plugged into environmental issues across the county, or maybe you want to learn about environmental issues and engage in them. Today, we'll learn a little bit about what a general plan is, why it is such an important document, and then we'll give an update about which cities across the county are in the process of updating their general plans and how you can get involved. I do want to acknowledge there are a number of people here today from outside of the county. And while this will be Contra Costa focused, we have tried to provide a bit more general information as well to make this useful for you too. For those who are just joining, please feel free to welcome yourself or introduce yourself in the chat and announce where you are coming in from. I also wanted to take a moment to acknowledge our partners and the many people who helped put this together and communicate this workshop. In particular, I'd like to thank my organizing partners, Marty Roach from 350 Contra Costa, the Contra Costa Climate Action Network, Linda Dischambeau from Contra Costa Climate Leaders, and Julia Foote from the Sierra Club. You'll hear from them all a bit later. But as the saying goes, it takes a village, and there are many, many individuals and organizations that have supported this work and this workshop and this work overall. Over the past few years, the Contra Costa Environmental Stakeholders Group has come together to follow climate policies across the county and make sure that cities, the county, and elected officials and others are making the best possible decisions as it relates to sustainability, resilience, and healthy communities. But we can't do it alone. There's many, many people working on climate inequity issues across the county, and many of you are here today. The work that we're doing is important, and it's critical to come together and place concerted attention to the public processes in order to secure these essential changes. I also wanted to acknowledge that there's a lot of collective wisdom in this Zoom room and many levels and different kinds of expertise. We have aimed this workshop to be applicable and accessible to a wide audience. So if you have a bit of wisdom to share throughout the presentation, we encourage you to use the chat feature or to raise your hand. We'll stop for questions and conversation later on. I love all the introductions that are happening in the chat right now. While people are introducing themselves, notice the other people from your city, and we're hoping to really connect each other after this webinar and be able to facilitate connections. This is a critical moment for our country, the world, and the state of California. We've officially rejoined the Paris Climate Accords, finally, and the Biden administration is working to rebuild and repair some of the environmental destruction of the previous administration. Governor Newsom's budget this year includes large amounts of funding for clean energy, carbon sequestration, fire resilience, and more. The state legislative agenda has more bills than I've ever seen before around climate resilience, environmental protection, infill housing, and clean energy. A few months ago, Governor Newsom issued an executive order to protect 30% of land and water by 2030. But with how quickly climate change is worsening globally and here in the Bay Area, we know that's not enough. California, and more specifically the Bay Area, need to lead the rest of the world in creating a climate-safe future. We need more aggressive policies in an accelerated timeline now. According to our friends at the Climate Center and the Climate Safe California campaign, it's critical to accelerate our existing state goals to sequester carbon. Right now, the state plan is to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions to 80% below 1990 levels by 2045. But we don't have that kind of time. We need to do this by 2030. Then we need to get net negative emissions, where sequestration or the absorption of carbon is actually greater than emissions. You can learn more about this at climatesafeca.org. And we need to address our climate issues from all angles. Not the state and hopefully new federal legislation is wonderful. But we can't just take a top-down approach and wait for state regulations to make our communities more resilient. In order to fast track our climate goals, we need to work at the local level to make sure the right climate policies are in place. Speaking of the local level policies, I am thrilled to introduce our first speaker, Janet Abelson. Janet is a longtime city council member for El Cerrito, a Contra Costa city that has implemented many incredible climate policies over 2 decades. Janet has been a longtime climate champion and can speak to the critical importance of driving climate policy at the local level. Welcome, Janet.
Thank you very much for including me. I'm really kind of excited to be here because I consider that I came out of the community. I was originally a member of the disability community, and still I am actually, but something happened, and I'm not quite sure, but I all of a sudden became interested in the built environment around me, and I became interested in making it a more transit friendly place. And I think that was influenced greatly by my becoming a disabled person. So I got really involved in the community, but in the environment in particular. So I did things like Earth Day. We had a group called Sustainable El Cerrito, which looked at the issues around buildings in a sustainable way. And then I moved on to I started getting involved as part of the city, and I became a member of the Planning Commission. It just so happens that was when we redid our general plan. So the ideas that I had come across and was interested in doing on the Planning Commission, for example, and in my other areas, we were able to include in that general plan. And it's at this point a very old general plan, but it is still the operating general plan, except for a thing called a specific plan, which is actually even better. So I met Linda Dischambeau. I just have to say how I met her. She and I didn't know each other at all. And we happened to sit next to each other during a presentation by Al Gore in person. And it was on An Inconvenient Truth. If you're old enough, you may remember that. At this point, it's a little bit old. But anyway, that was how I met Linda. And it's been I haven't seen her a whole lot really recently, but I've always really enjoyed working with her and being her friend. And so anyway, this is a great opportunity. I just wanted to say real fast that as an elected official, I want to say that community groups are really important. They help influence what an elected official sees about the world around them. If nobody comes on an issue, they'll just think no one cares. And so there's no reason to be concerned about it or implement it or anything. But if people come, then it's a show that, in fact, it's an important issue and it's worth a serious review. So that's been a really important influence. But I also happened to come out of the free speech movement because I'm old enough to be out of that movement, I guess you could say. And I've always thought that it was really important in local government that everybody gets a chance to have their time to speak. And so it's something I carry forward to this day. And sometimes people, I think, don't like that because they want to get on with business or whatever. But we really do have to stop and take time to hear why people are there, what their thoughts are on the subject. And we need to learn how to work together to make our environment a better place to live. I think that's about all. I'll just stop there. I think I'm just the introducing person. So thank you very much for including me.
All right. Thank you so much, Janet. That was great. And yeah, I agree. Community groups are so essential, and it really is important to make sure that every voice is heard.
Mm-hmm.
As you all know, climate change is already affecting Contra Costa County. In recent years, changing weather conditions have led to many more extreme weather events, including localized flooding, extreme heat, fires, and air quality issues. Before we dive in any further, I'd love for you everyone to take a moment now to use the chat feature to share an example of a climate-related issue in your community that concerns you. Each year, the number of days with extreme heat increases. Every summer, cities across the county open their cooling centers and caution residents to take precautions so as to not overheat. The map here is from the Contra Costa County's briefing book for the general plan and shows the anticipated increase in Contra Costa in heat by 2099 based on a high risk scenario. The size and frequency of climate risks like wildfire is also anticipated to increase. Shown here is a map of wildfire risk across the unincorporated parts of the county. Over the last few years, California has experienced a dramatic rise in both the number and the severity of wildfire events. These fires have ravaged the wildland-urban interface areas, taking lives, destroying homes, and obliterating infrastructure. While some of the more devastating burns have happened in the North Bay and the South Bay, the size and the intensity of wildfires is increasing across the county with each fire season, and the wildfire smoke from fires in surrounding counties poses significant health risks to Contra Costa residents. Sea level rise is also a big threat to the county. As sea level rises, higher water levels will become more frequent, increasing the extent, depth, and duration of temporary flooding and expanding the area that is permanently inundated. Areas that currently flood will flood more frequently, and there will be more extensive, longer duration flooding in areas that are not yet flooded. This map is from the Bay Conservation and Development Commission's Adapting to Rising Tides program. BCDC has done extensive research on the risks that sea level rise poses to the communities across the county and the Bay Area. And overlaid in red on this map are the major transportation corridors to show just how traffic and access to surrounding communities will also be affected. But BCDC conducted a separate study on East Contra Costa County. And you can learn more about both of these at adaptingtorisingtides.org. But the initial Adapting to Rising Tides study only focused on West Contra Costa County. And due to the very different conditions in East County and the Delta, BCDC conducted a second study to look at how sea level rise will impact Oakley, Bethel Island, and other East County cities. Shown here is an 100-year storm event and 36 inches of sea level rise. The Delta and East Contra Costa County Adapting to Rising Tides program is doing extensive research and outreach in the area right now. And I know that there are a number of Oakley residents on the call right now, and sea level rise is definitely a major factor in your community. And I encourage everyone to take a look at the East County Sea Level Rise viewer on the BCDC Adapting to Rising Tides program as well. So climate impacts that I was just talking about, like wildfire, heat, and sea level rise, will be more acutely felt by low-income communities and communities of color who have already experienced a combination of historic discrimination, negligence, and political and economic disempowerment. Many of these communities are struggling with both a disproportionate burden of pollution and health impacts, as well as disproportionate social and economic disadvantages, like housing instability. As we advocate and plan for a more sustainable, resilient future, it's critical to put environmental justice at the front and center of this work. At the state level, SB 1000, the Planning for Healthy Communities Act, passed in 2016, and it was enacted to respond to this inequity by both alleviating pollution and health impacts and compelling cities and counties to include the voices of previously marginalized residents in long-range planning decisions. SB 1000 requires that general plans address environmental justice in disadvantaged communities within the areas covered by the general plan. But this requirement only applies if a city is updating 2 or more elements at once, and if they have disadvantaged communities as indicated by Cal EnviroScreen. We'll get into this a little bit more later. Regardless of how many elements a city is updating, environmental justice needs to be made a priority throughout the general plan process and across city departments and programs. It takes efforts from community members like yourself to hold cities accountable and push them to implement environmental justice policies as part of their climate policies. The East County Community Leaders Network is doing just that. and I'm thrilled to introduce Benisa Berry from the East County Community Leaders Network. This is a grassroots group of residents and allies from around the county who are focused on increasing leadership and advocacy to influence policy in East County, particularly in Pittsburgh and Bay Point. Benisa, welcome. Oop, I think you're on mute.
I am on mute. Thank you. Thanks, Zoe. So my name is Benisa Berry, and I'm here representing the East County Community Leaders Network. And the CLN, first of all, is delighted to be a co-sponsor of today's workshop, as evidenced by the number of people on the call, as well as your timely attendance and showing up. I'm pleased to see so much interest in climate policy and to welcome each of you to this community convening. And I want to thank the planning committee for allowing us, or me, to provide a brief period to tell you about our group. So the Community Leaders Network, or CLN for short, is a community group that's comprised of residents of Contra Costa County who are committed to addressing inequities and improving the quality of life for people of color and for the traditionally marginalized communities of and neighborhoods in East Contra Costa. So our focus is on empowering and building the capacity of residents, those who have lived experiences with and face the challenges and limitations of our current county infrastructure on a daily basis, and to engage those residents in community dialogue, civic participation, advocacy, and political decision-making. So outcomes of the work really include ensuring that these residents have increased awareness of issues such as climate change, greater participation in civic engagement, and greater leadership representation for people of color and traditionally marginalized communities in East County. So it is important to notice, however, that while our practices and our focus centers people of color in East County communities and neighborhoods, our membership includes representation from across the county. And this group was born out of assistance from the San Francisco Foundation and was established and is sponsored by the Center for Human Development, which has almost 50 years of providing service to the community in a variety of areas. So the CLN, like you, really cares about creating a more resilient and equitable future for Contra Costa County, and especially East County, where there is a disproportionate impact of decision-making that goes on, and to promote creative problem solving and to really work towards transforming systems that improve the quality of life for all residents. We feel, and it was mentioned earlier by Janet, the importance of really having all voices heard. So what we're really trying to do is move from systems of representation of a few to representation by all community members, and to move from disempowered to empowered residents, and to move from invisibility to visibility of disenfranchised communities in informal government and community meetings. And I'm just building on Janet's presentation, and thought it was really critical when she said that if no one shows up, then people will just think no one cares and that it's not important. So really emphasizing the importance of having that voice and having that input. So as part of its work, the CLN has developed a vision for East County, and in addition, an equity agenda that really crosses the areas of transportation, housing, economic development, and jobs, health, and the environment. So to guide our work, we have a vision for environmental justice, which you're seeing on the screen. And it really is about creating a safe place where we live and we work and we play, and we're not bombarded by the impacts that we currently have that are creating a lot of disparities, especially for East County, Bay Point, and Pittsburgh in particular. So in order to do that, we've worked on a lot of initiatives, and the CLN really started with the Northern Waterfront Development Initiative. And of course, there were expected impacts on East County from that development. And we're now so we've worked on increasing and developing recommendations to guide those strategic priorities. And currently we are engaged in supporting the county's Envision 2040 general plan development process for the county and for the city of Pittsburgh. And that happens through active engagement in community meetings and providing recommendations on plan development. And again, we feel that it's critical for those who are most impacted have their voices heard and act upon. So because you're here, I know that we do share something in common. And so I also, we care about creating inclusive, healthy communities that thrive, communities that support the dignity and full potential of all residents. And because we have these things in common, I wanted to invite you to learn more about how you can support the CLN in these efforts. And there's several ways to do this. You might be interested in joining the CLN as a member. You might be a resident of East County, or you may have ideas or resources to offer that the CLN could support moving that would help move the CLN forward in our work. You might want to include us in your network by introducing yourself and letting us know how you also are working towards common goals. And you might want to add us to your mailing list, or you might have opportunities for collaboration. Whatever it is, please send me a private chat. Oh, I'm already getting one with your contact information, and I will follow up with you. I will also put my contact information in the chat if you'd like to take that down and follow up with me later by email. So with that, I'll just say that I am excited about the possibilities. I'm excited about the energy and commitment and passion that I feel in this room. And probably a year ago, people would thought that was impossible to do over a Zoom platform, but I am coming to realize that it's actually much more engaging in being able to read a group and feel energy on Zoom. And with that, I am going to turn it back over to Zoe. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Benisa. Yeah, we are also very excited about the energy here. And I think, there are, some downsides, obviously, to our new Zoom world, but one major benefit is really the ability to come together from, across the Bay Area and across, the country much easier for moments like this. And so we're, very excited about working with the East County Leaders Network and look forward to working with you in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thanks for the chats that I'm getting. Keep them coming.
Yeah. So as you've heard from a few different people already, but now really is the moment. There's a lot happening at the state level, but climate impacts are increasing and we need to do more at the local level. As mentioned before, there's a lot happening, yet we face seemingly insurmountable climate risks. As advocates and activists, we're trying to encourage a common frame. Mitigation and adaptation are blending these days, and you really can't have one without the other. We need to keep focusing on reducing the causes of climate change, what's called mitigation, as we also work to adapt and creatively develop resilience to impacts in our communities, what's commonly referred to as adaptation. City and county action is needed. Cities are legally required to have general plans and to develop climate action plans, but they need us and our voices to ensure that these plans go far and fast towards equitable climate solutions. In our new or not so new digital world, it's easier than ever before to engage in public processes and come together like processes like the general plan. So far we've heard from an elected official, we've heard from a grassroots organization. Now we're going to dive into the general plan itself. I would like to introduce Linda Dischambeau, environmental scientist with the US EPA for 21 years, the former mayor of Moraga, a current commissioner for the East Bay Regional Parks District, and the current executive director of the Contra Costa Climate Leaders, also known as 4CL. She is a champion of climate policies overall and across the county and beyond. Take it away, Linda. And she's tuning in with limited internet, so let's keep our fingers crossed that this works.
Hey, everybody. Can you all hear me okay, Zoe?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Great. So I have a series of slides, and I'm going to take about 20 minutes this evening to give you a really big top level 10,000 foot view of the general plans. and why they are so critical to climate action and advocacy for helping us to address the climate crisis. Zoe's changing the slides for me, so I'm going to be slightly annoying and keep saying next when we go to the next slide, just to make sure we're on the same page. So a general plan really is the highest level of local policy. That's been proven time and again. It's required by state law, the state of California, and it's also been proven through case law that has continued to support that every county and every city must have a comprehensive, a long-term general plan for the physical development of their county or city, and it can also include areas outside its boundaries. And it's often called, in the general plan, even in case law, has been called the constitution for a city for future development. So you're going to hear me use that term a few times here this evening. Next slide. So the city's general plan dictates its goals for the future and how it plans to achieve those goals. What's interesting, or maybe not because it's so complicated, is it is only updated maybe every 10, 20, or 30 years. There's other innuendos, Janet mentioned specific plans. We're not going to get into that. There are sometimes certain elements that are updated. We're not going to get into that. The thing really to think here is that truly the general plan is what's setting the vision and sets the priorities for shaping the future for a city, for a town, for a county, for local governments. California requires every government to have one. They're required to periodically update it, and they do monitor it annually for ensuring it's being implemented. But again, typically only every 10, 20, or 30 years do we see it's actually being updated. So if we have some going on right now, it could be another decade before we have a chance to weigh in on what we want our cities to include in our constitution, in our general plan, because this is really the time that we need to weigh in if we have general plan updates going on. Excuse me, next slide. So our nonprofit, Contra Costa Climate Leaders, went back. It had been 10 years since we had looked to see what was the status of all the climate action plans in Contra Costa County. We had actually worked with a partnership in grants with US EPA and ICLEI and had done a white paper, but we found that a lot had been changing in 10 years. So we went back recently and prepared a white paper and took a look at what was going on with cities' climate action plans. And what we found was that many cities on their own as climate leaders, some had a little pressure from the former Attorney General, and later he was our governor. Jerry Brown was a big climate champion. But a lot of cities we found are just going straight to the general plan, taking the next leap, putting the clear language, the climate mitigations, the specifics. So we did a paper, and I think Marty can share that now, if a full paper that went through not only looking at where cities were at in their climate action plans, which had been the core place of where most cities were addressing climate change in the past, and particularly 10 years ago, but also where all those cities are right now with their general plans, and if any of them are adding general plan language into their general plan at the time of update. And why is this a good thing? Well, really because the general plan really is sort of the higher level of policy. They're more binding and they have some potential for more lasting impacts. So the report showed on the next slide, and then we took all of that and we put it into an online interactive map to find out where are all our cities in Contra Costa. Now, I know some of you on the call today aren't from Contra Costa County, but you may find this interesting, and you may also want to know that Marin and San Mateo, we're working on a grant with Drawdown Marin to expand this. And it's a pretty cool deal. It's an online map. The link Marty can share in the chat. And it's visual and it's interactive, which that isn't coming through right now on Zoom. But what happens is as the city proceeds forward with doing the steps of a climate action plan, they go from white to dark green. And they also go from a small dot to a larger dot. So just real quickly, a large dark green dot shows a city that's taking some leadership, like Richmond is a dark green dot, whereas a small dot and a white dot shows no climate leadership, like Clayton and Hercules. Now, why am I spending any time on this? Well, basically, after this call, you're going to all be getting a toolkit, and this will be included in that. that you can go back and you can look at this map, and it's interactive. When you hover over those dots, you can actually click to the actual general plan and to the actual climate action plan if your city has one. So it's a great tool, and what it really did more than anything is we really got a status of what we found out in Contra Costa County. In the next slide is that we have 4 cities who are in the green with a white check mark, who have already done a general plan update that includes a climate element. But we found that this year, seven of our 19 cities and the county, we kind of lump them as a local government, are on this chart in yellow and say IP for in progress. They're actually undergoing a general plan update plan right now. The other cities that are in gray have not yet scheduled that we know of, not since this white paper, to update the general plan, but just know that there's going to be other opportunities for them to make sure we get climate language into their constitution, into their general plan. So let's dig a little bit more now into general plans. Actually, the next page is a summary again of the 7. So the 7 that are updating their general plans, and I see that some of you in our workshop are from either the unincorporated areas of the county, Pittsburgh, Pleasant Hill, Martinez, Oakley, Hercules, and Lafayette. So they're all going through general plan updates, and the reason for this workshop today is we're hoping that with a 10,000-foot look and with our assistance and our help, you can engage in this process and help us know, help us to go to these meetings and ensure that these updates have some robust language. So let's think about this, and well, that's overwhelming, Linda. I don't know the first thing about general plans. So just a big picture view again. What is the general plan? And mention it's a constitution, it's a blueprint, but just like any building has to have a blueprint, has to lay out, you know, where everything's going to be. A general plan has to contain certain elements, or you can think of them as chapters, that the state requires, where a city has to lay out the basics of how they're going to guide a city's growth. And the California state requires certain mandatory elements for all cities, and that's here on this slide. Land use, safety, circulation, housing, open space, noise, and conservation. So I think already some of you are probably thinking, well, climate change impacts just about all of these. So where do we put it? Where does it go? How could I possibly help with these updates that are happening? And then really what also is happening in our county is many of our elected officials and staff are saying it doesn't need to go into the general plan at all. It can just be left out in the climate action plan. But I think it's important to know that the difference between a climate action plan and the general plan is that one flows from the other. The general plan is the umbrella, and all policy documents flow from that general plan. So the CAP is really a policy document, where the general plan, it lays out the goals. And whether a city has a CAP or not, it's really essential that these cities, all cities, whether the 4 have done it already and need some help, whether it's the 7 we're looking at right now or the ones that are to come. Hopefully this workshop's going to give you a little bit more background and information. I'm going to throw out a quick example here of why it's important. See these elements of the general plan under conservation. In my town of Moraga, when I was the mayor, we had language we thought was very clear: protect ridgelines and hillsides. But what happened later, when the policy documents which flow from the general plan were developed, there was a never-ending battle. It's like, how do we define a ridgeline? How tall are they? How short are they? What's a hillside? How steep are they? And it was like a 9 or 10-year battle. We never had it defined in the general plan. Our policy documents changed often depending upon who was elected at the time. And it took us 10 years to kind of get what we want. So the same right now, if you're like, well, where's climate change fit into all of this? It has to fit everywhere. I mean, we need to really think through, and we really need to work hard on where this goes. But what's also interesting is that it gets some flexibility. So in the next slide, you'll see that. I'm going to check in with you, Zoe. Is this going well? Sound okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay, thank you. So the general plan, in addition to all those elements that could all have certain language that we need to include on climate change, there is also a lot going on in Sacramento, and the law is now requiring that a general plan must include an element or a chapter. I kind of use those interchangeably, in addition to those ones in the last slide that are required. A new element or new chapter on environmental justice is being required, particularly when a city is updating its general plan for more than one or two of the elements, and particularly if they do have a disadvantaged community in their town or city, which quite frankly, most of them do. And further, the governor's office is also now recommending and has provided guidance in language and workshops asking cities to consider adding a separate element on climate change into their general plans. And then we have other cities who are taking the option and they're allowed to add elements or chapters, and they're adding chapters. Often they're called energy or sustainability. So trying not to get too into the weeds, but that just kind of lays out the chapters or the elements of a general plan, how we can add chapters. But also, I need to mention just briefly, this year by 2022, in addition to the 7 cities that I mentioned that are updating their general plan, every city in Contra Costa County is also working to update the housing element portion of their general plan. It just so happens those are usually done every 8 years. And it just so happens they're colliding with the cities doing their general plan updates. Well, obviously the built environment and housing is yet another place where we need to weigh in on climate change. So moving on, regardless of which section, whether it's a separate section or separate chapter, whether, we have each of our own issues, what we think are priorities. It's clear, like transportation is 50% of our greenhouse gas emissions, et cetera. But every general plan ends up having what's called an implementing policy, whichever section you put it on. And a general plan is only as good as its implementing policy, or its IPs is the common language. And the state of California requires that the cities review these IPs every year. And so already maybe I'm losing some of you, like, what is she talking about, IPs? So in the general plan, there'll be a chapter, an action, a goal, but at the bottom of that, there's an implementing element that is the measurable. Think of it a little bit like an EIR. At the end of an EIR, you have a clear monitoring plan, a clear direction, something that you're going to monitor. So these IPs are similar to that. So you'll attend a meeting and they'll be like, well, an IP 4-6. So that means the implementing point for chapter 4, item 6. So you'll hear that term, but this is where I'm going to get into a few examples, and hopefully I haven't lost you yet, because I'm going to bring you all back if I have. Well, how do I know what a good IP is or a bad IP, which section? So the next slide, what we have done is that we have a group of environmental stakeholders that has already gone through, we've actually had an updated workshop from the governor's office, and we've identified some key statements, some key items that we would like all general plans to include. So we've tried to lay out some of the specific requests that we want, and I want you to know again that this letter and these points will be available today. At the end of this session, we have a toolkit that you'll receive. You can sign on to this letter with us. You can use our bullet points to help guide you. You can use these to prepare comments when you're ready to go and talk to your elected officials at a city council meeting. But let's dig into a couple of them on slide 28, just to give you some examples of what's in that very lengthy letter, or 2 letters we prepared. So for instance, in an open space element, to avoid a situation like the example I gave you in Moraga, it'd be better if the general plan were very specific, concise, and measurable, so that it would actually say under the open space element, not just protect ridgeline and hillsides, which the lawyers and developers drove a truck through. Literally, we lost most of our open space land. It would say specifically, prohibit development on ridgelines over 300-foot elevation, develop hillside restrictions on any slopes greater than 25%, require that you restore natural features, prohibit invasive plants, and require native species. What happened in the town of Moraga, because it said protect and restore, protect ridgelines, the developers argued that if they went in and bulldozed them flat and put in some rebar, that they were protecting them, that they were making sure that they wouldn't slide and be a problem. So it's critical that a general plan have language, and it's critical that us as advocates are working to make sure that the language is sealed tightly and can achieve the objective we want, that these IPs are measurable. Another quick example on slide 29 is a housing element. This is some language that is from the Contra Costa draft environmental justice policy right now. And I personally think this is an example of where we might want to be more specific, because it says assist low-income homeowners and improve residential properties through rehabilitation and energy assistance programs, but doesn't really say how. I mean, I would ask them to define how they will assist. Will they start a new city-based rebate program? Will they have a loan program? Are they going to have a solar giveaway or bulk purchase for low-income people? There's a lot of things that a city could actually go into more detail on in an element like that. Another example, looking at the big picture, like I said, climate action plans, in no way do I mean to say that we don't need them. In fact, we need both language in the general plan and a climate action plan. But in the general plan, it should be very clear and lay out the specifics. So it should require a climate action resiliency plan. It should require a greenhouse gas inventory. Some cities don't do an inventory, they just have a plan. It should include both community-wide and the city's own operations. So you can lay these out, so when you're updating your general plan, you could say, here's some language that I want you to put in the general plan for my city. And on the next one, on housing elements, this has been a big thing right now. We want all new development and significant remodels. And here we might define anything over $200,000 must meet or exceed recycled water plumbing, and which is commonly called purple pipe, and full electrification, which means no natural gas hookups, that we want everything to be electrified and to be running off of renewable energy. So this is a good example. It doesn't make sense anymore to flush our toilets and water our lawns with drinking water standard, and it doesn't make sense to keep using natural gas. So why don't we put that in our general plan now that we're updating it and making sure all the houses going forward follow that? Don't just say follow green building standards. It's best to be really specific. Transportation on the next slide is another opportunity where we want to require all new developments will include improvements to transit, to bikeways, to sidewalks, and making sure that disadvantaged communities especially have access to that transportation, and at the same time reducing traffic in our area. So ultimately, all of this is, some of you, I saw the questions before the workshop were like, well, how do we enforce them? They're in the general plan, but my city's not doing them. I saw some great examples. In fact, Brentwood is a perfect example. Brentwood updated their general plan with what looks like this great language that says they're going to be doing a climate action plan. And here we are, I think, 7 years later, and they don't have it on their agenda to do a climate action plan. Well, one of the things that a town does, city or town does have to do is do an annual review of those IPs. So every year, the general plan IPs go through those implementing thing, and did we meet them? So that's why it's really important that us as advocates make sure those IPs are as tight as possible. And then you say, well, fine, they were tight. They still weren't, like Brentwood, they still aren't being enforced. But it doesn't take away the fact that that's up to us to continue to do that. And it also is becoming more of an issue in Sacramento. It is becoming more of an issue to consider how the state is not necessarily enforcement, but they are doing compliance, and they are starting to tie some of state funding to what's in general plans. And they are starting to get into issues like I told you earlier, mandating an environmental justice section. So we do have opportunities, and more than ever, the burden is on individuals to step up and attend these meetings, and cities are doing it. On the next slide, 34. I want to just give a couple examples because I've heard from some cities, from some counties that say, oh, we're not going to get into that level of detail. That's going to come later in the climate action plan. We don't do that in general plans. Well, they do. Maybe not the staff or city person you're talking to, but cities do. So I have two great examples. Pinole in our county, who has updated it, have this is the language for in their general plan. And it's good language. It has very specific targets, 15% below current or baseline levels by the year 2020. It has a timeline. Within 12 months, the climate action plan is going to be done. It includes forecasts out to 2020 and 2030. So this is pretty decent language. It's much stronger than what I've seen in some of the other others. And then the last one example I'm going to give you on slide 35 is Richmond. And you're like, whoa, am I supposed to read this? Well, in this case, what I was trying to prove is that a general plan, this is right out of the general plan, can go into many words, can go into details, despite what some of our cities or our county leaders are telling us that, oh, we're going to do that later. We're going to do a climate action plan later. It's important also to be in the general plan. This is Richmond's language from their general plan, and it lays out exactly what must be in the climate action plan. So you don't have a county commission who's arguing of what to include or not include. The general plan has laid it out, the goal, the constitution, and now the policy can follow. There's no discussion on whether or not we're going to discuss sea level rise or biodiversity or public health or water supplies. Richmond is very clear and very specific, and as advocates, we too can advocate for this in our cities. It goes into needing to deal with businesses. It goes into a lot of detail. So no more time on that right now, other than I made my point there about we can be specific, and cities do get specific, and you're allowed to do that. So again, I just gave a bunch of examples. I'm going fast and furious. The point tonight is not to make you experts, but to know that we will have guidance for you. We will provide this for you after the workshop, and you can use this. You'll be able to sign on and support this letter. You can write your own letter. You can attend your own city meeting. And after me, Julia is going to go into some of that. And our goal tonight is also to equip you to feel like you're ready to attend a meeting, that you have some big enough concept of what general plans are, that you want to go. I have a saying on our website that says, just because you don't take an interest in politics doesn't mean politics won't take an interest in you. Meaning climate change is impacting all of us, all of our families, all of future generations. And so it's really important that all of us get engaged. So before I turn it over to Julia, who's from Sierra Club and is going to give us some specs on what's next, what do we do with this information? On slide 37, we're going to see if you guys have just a couple questions. If we have time for that still, Marty, put questions in the chat if you have questions about what I've presented on general plans.
Yeah, I think we have some time. So if anybody has questions, feel free to ask them now. Or just unmute yourself and you can ask. Yeah.
I have a question.
You could put them in the chat as well. I'd love to save them. I think we can save the questions later.
Yeah, but whoever.
Yes, go ahead.
So if you have a 100-year-old house and you don't have enough amperage coming in, do you have any suggestions? I understand if you want to convert your appliances to electrical, have a suggestion, particularly on where to go, or is it just any electrician?
Well, we're talking more tonight about the policy of how a city would deal with that. And that could be something in their general plan. They would identify with having to work with the local utilities to ensure that electrification is an option for for their residents. As far as individual, I'm sure offline, folks like Wei Tai who are on the phone might have run into that, can send you a personal message.
Linda,
But I don't think specifically that's sort of about a big policy question about, you know, what would go into a general plan, but it's a real issue that we all need to know about.
if I can just chime in, this is Marty from 350 Contra Costa. If you write me in the chat, I can make sure you get the announcement. 350 is participating in a homes tour of homes that are models for using renewable energy, and it's geared to be able to answer a lot of those questions, and that's going to be coming up pretty soon. So if you write me, Marty Roach, in the chat, I can make sure you get information on that.
Thanks, Marty. And to answer your question in the chat, Tammy, yes, general plans are public. You can usually Google your city's name and, you know, general plan, and it will come up. And some cities have separate websites for their general plan, usually when they're, you know, in the process of updating their general plan. But it's always public. Usually they're kind of like large wonky documents. So it's useful to, you know, really, you know, work through it and debrief it and reach out to your elected official or the city staff in your city to ask any questions if you have questions or concerns about the general plan. And thank you, Jody, for providing the link for the Bay Area Regional Energy Network about home retrofits. And in regards to Christian's question about how COVID is affecting these plans, we have noticed that COVID has extended, you know, has extended the timeline for many of the general plan processes across the county. You know, when people had to switch to working from home, they didn't have access to the mapping features they needed in their office, and everything slowed down a little bit. But I did want to highlight that the Contra Costa County's general plan process has slowed down quite a bit, but they're really taking advantage of this opportunity and doing significantly more workshops and meetings, and, you know, taking this as an opportunity to do more outreach and engage more with their constituents. So they are, you know, making lemonade out of lemons, or whatever the phrase is a little bit. Any other questions? Let's see. The JPGM's question, suburbs, yes, suburbs definitely need to embrace infill multi-story development to curb sprawl and fight climate change. Yeah, the housing elements, we'll get into this a little bit more later, but the housing elements is a really critical opportunity for everyone to get involved, whether you're from one of the 7 cities in Contra Costa County that's updating their general plan, or you live anywhere else in California. Your city is about to update their housing element, and every city has an increased number of units that they have to zone for this year. And because of the, you know, compounding housing crisis and climate crisis, we have to make sure that these houses are zoned for infill development and in existing communities, and are not built in sprawl, you know, they're not built as sprawling development, because we can't afford to lose any more open space, because we need that for carbon sequestration purposes and to make sure that we have fewer wildfires in the future. I did see a raised hand and then it disappeared. If you raised your hand, feel free to speak right now, and then maybe we'll keep going.
I'm concerned about the cost of changes and updates that are needed, the economic downturn following COVID, and what is the possibility of getting federal support for any of this? Because I'm pretty sure that my city is going to say that we really don't have the kind of budget.
Yeah, what city are you from?
El Cerrito.
Okay. Yeah, so the governor's budget this year did have a number of line items related to resilience, you know, coordinating general plans, wildfire, energy efficiency, and other things. And so we'll see how it shakes down. But yes, cost is definitely going to be a major factor. But we also can't afford not to do this, because if we don't act now, these costs are going to, you know, come on us in the future as it relates to, you know, cleaning up after a disaster. And so we have to figure out how we get the funding now. And the state is aware of it. There's a number of bills in the legislative agenda this year and the governor's budget that are addressing these things. All right, Marty, do you see any other questions, or does anybody else have any questions, or should we?
I didn't notice any others, and I also didn't know how to get my little box off of the Zoom presentation.
Okay.
But I didn't see other questions. So please speak up if we missed one that was written in the chat.
All right. Not seeing other questions, I will continue. And we'll have another opportunity for more questions and conversations afterwards. So now I would like to welcome Julia Foote from the Sierra Club to really share more about how we can take action now that we know all about general plans.
Yeah, thanks, Zoe. Hi, everyone. My name's Julia. I'm a community organizer for the Sierra Club SF Bay chapter. Sierra Club focuses on many issues, but in the Bay Area, land use is a major place where we get involved, and we try to advocate for smart growth, better public transportation access, affordable, dense infill housing, and limiting sprawl. So as Linda was saying, a city's climate action plan and their general plan are really critical public documents that lay out a city's vision for a more livable, environmentally just, and economically prosperous community with a higher quality of life. And general plans are required by law to undergo community participation because staff can't know on their own what's best for city's residents without asking them. But the problem is that there's no requirement for robust engagement. And this is where all of you come in. It's absolutely critical for local residents like yourselves to get involved in your local general plan update. They're only updated every 20 to 30 years. And we all know that the next decade is crucial for climate action. So now is really the time to act. And as I said, public engagement is a requirement for the general plan process. But cities often struggle to get really deep and meaningful engagement that's required to reflect the diverse range of opinions and needs of a community. So despite outreach efforts, many people are unaware that these processes are even happening in their community, and engagement for these plans usually only includes a very small fraction of the population. One example is when the city of Antioch adopted its new climate action plan, the city gathered the opinions of 200 community members, which is really great, but 200 opinions only accounts for 0.1% of that city's population. So obviously we really want to come together for that type of robust community engagement. So how do you get involved? I'll go to the next slide, Zoe. So there are a number of ways that you can get involved and take action. Signing a petition is a really easy way for us to join forces and bring voices together on a particular issue so that decision makers kind of hear one resounding demand or ask. It's easy, and sometimes you have the option to add your own personal comment, which can really help your individual concerns come through. Writing a letter is a great way to express your opinion and share your own specific comments. It's really great to write a letter if you can't attend a meeting. So sending that letter to your city staff or elected officials. We're going to talk a lot about attending a meeting, delivering public comment at a city council meeting, or participating in other community engagement processes or forums. It's a great way to really get the ear of your city officials. In many ways, just speaking directly feels like the best way to convey a message or the passion that you have for an issue. And we can't forget that now we are living in the era of Zoom. So with meetings held over Zoom, we're kind of navigating a new arena for attending meetings and speaking at them. And it definitely can be a bit more confusing. And maybe it's intimidating for you to show up at a video meeting. But public forums have adapted in a lot of ways to make sure you have time to speak and know when it's your turn. Every city does have a different way of calling in, so make sure you look it up and know how to call in if it's Zoom or a phone line or something else. to provide your comment. And generally speaking, you'll usually have 2 to 3 minutes to speak. So it's definitely helpful to have your comment prepared and to practice and time yourself before joining a meeting. Aside from those like 3 concrete actions, signing petitions, writing letters, speaking at meetings, if you have issues of particular concern in your city's general plan update that you would like to speak to, you can reach out to your local elected officials or city staff. Some city officials actually hold open hours to chat with constituents, and if your representative does not, just try sending them an email and see if you can arrange a time or call to check in with them or a staffer so you can discuss your concerns. And then the last thing I'll touch on is organizing with your community. That really encapsulates all of these other aspects of activism, but the more people there are advocating for something, the more likely it is that that demand of the community will be heard and responded to. And so it is really uncommon for the general public to know the importance and impact of a local or county general plan. And it leaves most people in any jurisdiction unlikely to pay attention to and engage in public processes as part of a general plan update. So if you know others in your community who care about environmental policy and equity, bring them into the loop with you on the advocacy that you're going to be doing for general plan updates. Stay in touch with others so you can all stay informed on what's happening with different processes and other opportunities to engage. And taking action in community is always more powerful than doing it alone. And it's often more fun, rewarding, and creative to take action with community. So for example, a community of advocates can organize a letter writing campaign or do a phone zap, which is like calling and leaving messages for a specific target with a shared ask, or even pulling together an event like this to keep building momentum in a larger community of engaged advocates. And we're going to share a whole toolkit with you on how to get involved. And a major part of us sharing this is to bring more and more members of your community into the fold. So I'm going to go ahead and share this Contra Costa General Plan Toolkit. Can you see my screen okay? So this is a toolkit that was put together by Greenbelt Alliance, and there's a lot of different tabs to help you navigate how to engage with general plans. I'm going to speak a little bit to the steps for taking action tab. So you can take action today by signing a letter that was written by a coalition of environmental advocates to urge the county to incorporate critical, environmental, and equitable policies in the general plan update for the county. And this letter really outlines policy suggestions to achieve our shared vision of a county that will adapt to and thrive in the face of the climate crisis. So if you read through this language and agree with it and want to share your support, you can sign on to this letter by filling out your information here, which brings us to step 2, which is staying in the loop. Staying in the loop is really key to being a climate activist in your community. I know it can be really difficult to stay on top of meetings, public engagement processes, community forums, public comment deadlines, and we want you to know that we are here to help. So before you submit your signature, you can check certain boxes to help you stay in the loop. So you can check to get emails and text messages about this campaign so we can give you updates and notify you when things are happening. And if you want to level up your engagement, you can check, I would like to attend a meeting with city staff at some point, or I would like to be a point person for general plan advocacy in my community. And if you check these boxes, we can support you to move towards deeper levels of engagement in your city. And step 3 in taking action is speaking up. So sharing your opinion with local elected officials is an important way of ensuring that climate action planning is actually occurring in your community. And so to just zoom out for a moment, there are over 1 million residents in Contra Costa County. And so if just 1% of the residents chose to attend a city council meeting, 10,000 voices would be heard. And so while attending one meeting may not feel like much, the more people we engage with a clear vision, the more influence we have to shape local policy. So that's why we really want to encourage you to take the steps that you need to get to a meeting. Yeah, so when you know your opportunity to provide public comment, for example, if you get an email notification from us after signing up for them, it's time to think about what you want to say, how you want to say it, and kind of how it fits in the format of the specific meeting that you're joining. And as you can see, this toolkit is super handy. It provides a sample letter template. So if you can't make a meeting, or if you really don't like providing public comment, you can write a letter to send to elected officials. And then there's a template for public comment that you would give at a Zoom meeting. And then this drop-down list here has a list of actions you can request your city to include in their general plan update, which is going to be really relevant in crafting your comment. So with that, I'm going to go into how you develop your public comment. So Zoe, if I could get that back up. Yeah. Public comment is an opportunity to really capture the attention of policymakers and have your voice heard. When you're actually speaking to city officials, you can capture your passion for an issue, and it's often easier to elicit like a response by using your voice. Of course, like I said, we need to adapt to a Zoom format, but video meetings are still a really important avenue to use. So if you're uncomfortable delivering public comment by speaking up, or if you're unable to attend a meeting, like I said, you can often share your comments in a letter. And I'm just going to get into some of the best practices for developing a comment. So if you could go to the next slide, Zoe. Okay, so these are some elements that you want to think about when you're putting together a public comment. One specific person is to remind you that you and your organization hold a unique perspective. While we hope that many of you are going to show up because you have a shared value to improve general plans, you have to remember that your perspective and your personal story can attract attention to an issue and inform policymakers who don't know that issue from your perspective. One value means being clear on what the issue you're speaking to is and why you care about it. So our shared value here is that the county incorporates critical environmental and equitable policies into the general plan update. This is a thread that ties all of us here together, and you want to make it clear that we have organized people power in sharing this value. Personal impact is where you can dig into why this issue matters to you and how it impacts you specifically. And you want to try to incorporate some facts or data to back up your position. And then why it's a bigger problem. You want to share how this issue ties into the larger community and the responsibility of local officials to fulfill their duty of serving their community. So we all know that climate change and poor environmental policy have far-reaching impacts. Environmental injustices cause these burdens to fall harder on frontline communities now, and the impacts of decisions we make today will reach everyone. So once you're kind of tying this thread into the bigger picture, you make your call to action. This is where you make the ask specifically, what do you want your elected official to do? You can use the list of actions we just showed you in the Contra Costa General Plan Toolkit. And as Linda was mentioning about, how do we make these plans implementable? You can get really specific in what you want to see in your general plan. And so with those elements of developing your public comment, I want to talk a little bit about just how you would craft a message. So if you could go to the next slide, Zoe. So here, there's kind of like a formula for how to put a message together that you want to deliver public comment with. And instead of walking through these steps that I think are pretty clear, I'm just going to give a brief example of a potential comment that I might give if my city were updating its general plan. Good evening, council members. My name is Julia. I'm a constituent and resident of Berkeley. I'm also an organizer for the Sierra Club SF Bay chapter, and I work on land use issues for more resilient and adaptable Bay Area in the face of climate change. I'm here today to ask you to include language in our city's general plan update to ensure transit-oriented development that focuses economic development near housing or transit, reduces vehicle miles traveled, and promotes equitable access to jobs and services, especially for underserved communities. During the last year in lockdown, I've become better acquainted with my neighbors. One of my neighbors who doesn't have a car and can't afford one has lost access to transit service as more and more bus lines in our community shut down or run less frequently. She needs to find her way to her job in downtown Oakland and often says that she wishes we had more walk to job centers in our community like the area used to have. The pandemic has been really hard on her and many residents in my area, and I want us to prioritize a recovery that helps those hardest hit by COVID-19 and improves our communities into the future with robust transit access, affordable housing near transit, and mixed-use development so that we have more jobs and services in our own communities. We have so many opportunities to densify and diversify our housing supply near major transit lines, and we should do so. We know that as residential density increases, the level of car ownership decreases, leading to fewer car trips and less vehicle miles traveled. So for the sake of recovering from this crisis in a way that helps prepare us for climate impacts today and into the future, I'm again asking you to please update our city's general plan to ensure transit-oriented development, focus economic development near housing or transit, reduce vehicle miles traveled, and promote equitable access to jobs and services, especially for underserved communities. Thank you for your time and consideration. So that's an example of a 2-minute comment that you could give. That's kind of going after maybe a bit of a more general point that you want to see in the general plan language. But like I said, make the ask as specific as you want to make sure that it's implementable in your general plan. And with that, I'm just going to get into some tips before I close out. I think that practicing delivering your comment out loud and timing yourself is really important. Different meetings have different time limits. You often have 2 to 3 minutes, but that can vary depending on how many people show up. So it's a good idea to know how to shorten your comment on the fly, have like a 1-minute comment as a backup. And the beauty of delivering comment over a video call is that you can have your comment and a shortened version of it right up in front of you, which can help ease the nerves of speaking in person. You want to conclude by restating your position and thank them for considering your view. And remember that public testimony is usually one way, so don't expect the people you're addressing to respond to you. You should send a copy of your comment by email to the folks that you're addressing so that they have it on record. And as you're delivering comment, you want to be listening to others carefully so that you can play off of other relevant testimony that other people are giving without being too repetitive. And sometimes it's a good idea to record relevant comments so you know how many advocates you have in the room with you, and so you can make connections with those people following the meeting. And lastly, always be respectful. Don't signal your feelings as others testify. You will have your turn. So with all of that, with the toolkit and how to craft a comment and these tips, we encourage you to stay engaged in long-term community development by engaging with general plans. Having the eyes of the community on these plans really does make a difference. And if you're trying to influence city staff and electeds, remember that they are just people. Some of them are on our side and need help to advance the policies that we want to see, and others don't see it the way that we see it. And we want them to hear and know our perspective. They just need a nudge from the community. So with that, I can pause for a couple of questions. If anybody has any questions, you can share them in the chat or raise your hand. And I guess I'll say the toolkit that was put together is really very helpful and includes a lot of resources to help you with how to put together your comment or take action in other ways.
Yeah, and feel free to poke around the toolkit. There's all sorts of different tabs and pages with, talking points and the letters, and also links to a lot of the Contra Costa Climate Leaders website, as well as links to all of the general plans that are being updated and other resources. So while we continue talking, feel free to update or feel free to poke around in the toolkit. And we'll have a moment in a little bit for more questions. So if you have any, think of them now and we can get back to that. But for now, I think I will continue. Thank you, Julia. Let's see. Am I spotlighted? Yes. Oh, there we go. Okay. So now we've learned a lot, and this has been, we've learned a lot in the last 75 minutes or so, but I'd like to invite you all to write in the chat, one thing that you are doing or will be doing based upon what you've learned so far. So what are you working on in your community, or what do you want to work on in your community now? Do you attend city council meetings? Will you now, do you want to after hearing this? Just, share something in the chat related to that. And as we've discussed tonight, getting involved in your city's general plan process is critically important. We all need to make our voices heard. Of the cities updating their general plans currently, there are a few upcoming meetings. And tonight, right after this meeting, the Diablo Valley Water District is having a meeting about sea level rise in Oakley, with special presentations from BCDC and the Delta Stewardship Council. So for those of you who live in Oakley, I know there are a few Oakley residents in attendance still. We highly recommend you attend. You jump off this call and jump onto the next call at 6:30, because sea level rise really is a critical issue for your city. Also on March 10th, Pleasant Hill's General Plan Advisory Committee is having a meeting with a focus on public facilities, services, and infrastructure. For those interested, Pleasant Hill also has a few chapters of their general plan on review as drafts on their website, and these links are available in the general plan toolkit as well. And throughout March, Lafayette is having a series of meetings, focus, and workshops with specific geographic focus. There's one tomorrow night, and then there's another one on March 3rd, which is with a focus on community-based organizations. For unincorporated Contra Costa County, they just finished a series of environmental justice workshops, and they will, on March 22nd, the Contra Costa Sustainability Committee will be meeting to discuss the draft environmental justice elements. So that would be a great opportunity to tune in and learn a little bit more about that process. And these meetings will all specifically discuss the general plan. However, if your city is not updating its full general plan right now, you should still get involved and attend a city council meeting, because your city will soon be updating its housing element. You can go to your city's website to find out when the next city council or planning commission hearing is, or you can go to the Contra Costa Climate Leaders website calendar to find a comprehensive list of all of the city council meetings happening in your city this month. So I encourage you all to attend a meeting and to learn about what's going on in your community. I also wanted to plug that in addition to public meetings, many local jurisdictions will soon have draft policies ready to be reviewed, and some have them now. Right now, Contra Costa County has draft environmental justice policies that they are looking for feedback on. They just held a series of environmental justice focused workshops, as I mentioned, and now they have a Google form where you can review the policies and easily provide feedback if you missed the workshops themselves. You can click the link that I believe Marty is going to drop in the chat to review the policies, and they're really interested in your feedback. And I did want to acknowledge Jody London from Contra Costa County is on the call, and if you have any Contra Costa specific related questions, you're welcome to ask them in the chat, and I'm putting her on the spot, but she might be able to answer them as well. And even if you don't live in unincorporated Contra Costa, I highly recommend reviewing the environmental justice policies, because it's a really impressive list and a really interesting process. And if your city doesn't have these policies, this is a great resource to review and then push for similar policies in your community. Pittsburgh and Oakley should also have drafts available for public review soon, as well as upcoming public meetings. So if you live in those cities, stay tuned. As mentioned before, all of the meeting details for all of the meetings, links to general plans, websites, background information about general plans, and all of the links provided in the chat tonight are on the general plan toolkit website. And this really can be your one-stop shop for checking out the status of currently updated general plans across the county. And this will be updated continually. So please bookmark this and come back for more information. As previously mentioned, all cities have to update their housing element by 2022. If you're interested in getting involved in the housing element update in your city specifically, there is a campaign that's started by our YIMBY partners to hold cities accountable to making sure the housing that is zoned is sustainable, equitable, and in the right location. Greenbelt Alliance is proud to be a part of this campaign. If you're interested in this, send me an email or go to fairhousingelements.org to learn more. And I believe Aaron Eckhouse from YIMBY is also on the line. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask him in the chat as well. So I hope you've learned something new tonight and now have the tools, resources, and background information to get involved in your community. If you have not done so already, please log on and sign the petition to indicate that you're interested in staying involved in the Contra Costa Environmental Stakeholders Group. Write a letter to your elected officials. In the general plan toolkit, there's the sample letter and contact information for elected officials in your community. Make sure to go to the Contra Costa Climate Leaders website, calendar, see the list of all the city meetings and find one to attend or speak at. There are so many ways to get involved, and I hope we have emphasized how important it is to really get involved in climate issues in your city. We cannot reach our climate goals without you. So before I conclude, I did want to take a moment. There's a lot of really great information happening in the chat right now. And I wanted to pause once more and see if anybody had any questions or if anybody wanted to talk about some of the processes or policies that they're working on in their community. So if you have something to say, I think there's still too many of you for the raise hand feature to work. So feel free to just popcorn style, take yourself off mute and announce what you are working on or what you want to share.
Sammy might have a question, I think.
Sammy?
Yes, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, it's a great presentation, absolutely informative. I want to thank you for putting it on. What we're working on is something that's kind of been that's been wrapped up. Is this more of a question type of thing, or is it just a statement? Can I make a statement?
You can make a statement.
Excellent. So do you know anything about hydrogen and the use of hydrogen as an alternative fuel? I was just wondering if you can expand on that and maybe discuss a little bit that with the group.
I can't expand on that, but this I think is a really great opportunity. So if there's somebody else on the call that does know more about that, we could dive into that. Where are you from? Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Detroit in the United States.
Wow.
Interesting. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we're working on a hydrogen project, and we're using that as a template for an alternative fuel to alleviate all petroleum and petrol fuels, fossil fuels. And what we've come up with is a plan that I'm not going to discuss it in too much detail, but it's pretty exciting, and hopefully it's going to help in the long run.
Can Sammy share a link maybe? Just a link in the chat if people want to pursue it?
Sure thing. I'll post it there. Thank you.
Okay. I just saw that somebody else raised their hand. If your hand is raised, you're welcome to speak now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Valerie Jameson with Richmond Land. And yeah, this is a really great question. We're excited about being connected with individuals interested in both supporting equitable policies and actions in unincorporated areas of the county, given that our organization's Richmond Land, but we do a lot of work in North Richmond, recognizing it's unincorporated requires a different level of engagement and support, not only to elevate residents' voice and leadership in the process, but in the ways that we can advocate for stronger policies that can get implemented. So if there are organizations here that do work specifically now with SB 1000, seeing that we do have 6 primarily unincorporated communities that are designated disadvantaged, wanting to really do some work of kind of best practices across the county, I think that'd be very beneficial. I could put my information in the chat. And overall, I mean, we're an emerging community land trust and doing work on alternative housing models that are being seeded by residents' voice and participatory planning. So any organizations interested in deep resident engagement, leadership, and work, and particularly around BIPOC populations, we would absolutely want to connect and build the bigger we.
Great. Thank you, Valerie. Yeah, definitely put your information in the chat. And yeah, I would love to connect with you. And I imagine there are other people on the call that will as well. Does anyone else want to share anything?
Hi. Oh.
Hi.
I'm Lucy Weinhardt from Antioch, and I'm a part of Antioch Citizens to Save Sand Creek. And we successfully passed Measure T in Antioch this last fall that will, with a lot of help from Save Mount Diablo and Greenbelt Alliance and others, Sierra Club too. My concern is that there's lawsuits to prevent our measure from becoming law by the developers who had wanted to build some upscale homes and some of the land that's being protected. And I'm wondering if we know, if anyone knows of environmental laws that would supersede SB 330, which has to do with the housing crisis and not allowing communities to build fewer houses than might have been originally considered. Although obviously environmentally it's foolish to develop a beautiful open space that's far away from transportation instead of doing infill, which would make so much more sense environmentally. And I just wondered if anyone knows any kind of environmental laws that might supersede 330.
That's a good question. I'm not familiar with any environmental laws. Does anyone else have any advice for her? No, it's definitely very important to, make sure to build more infill housing to so we can protect our open spaces.
Right. Plus the housing crisis. This wouldn't help with people who need homes. It would only be homes for very wealthy people. So it makes no sense to me.
Yeah, definitely. All right, I think we have time for maybe one more person to speak. Does anybody else have anything to share or any other questions? All right. Well, we hope that you have found this webinar useful. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. I believe our contact information was provided in the chat, and you will get an email follow-up with all of this information as well. We really want to make sure if you have any questions or want to get involved in the general plan process in your community, but you don't quite know how, please reach out. We're here to help. And also, please feel free to connect with each other. For those who signed the petition and indicate that they would like to be involved, we would love to connect you to other like-minded individuals in your city, because our influence is magnified when we work collectively. If your city is not yet updating their general plan, stay involved, attend a city council meeting, and learn what's happening in your community. Go to a planning commission hearing and keep your ear to the ground to make sure you know what's going on. And starting soon, the environmental stakeholders will hold regular meetings where we can connect and learn and grow from each other. And we hope you join us, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening, and look forward to seeing you in a meeting or in a Zoom room, or maybe in the future, in an in-person gathering. So thank you all so much for joining, and thank you to everyone who spoke tonight, both the official speakers and the ones who joined us for conversation. This has been really wonderful, and we were really impressed by the interest and the engagement throughout this. And we hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening. Good night.
Thank you. Good job.
Thanks, Zoe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great program.
Bye, everyone.